Breaking news, the UK police open an investigation into Russell Brand. Now, I'm adding this at the front end of today's episode because prior to recording this update, I'd already stated that the UK police had not taken any action. But now British authorities have launched an investigation into Brand after receiving a number of allegations of sexual assault in London and across the country. None of the offences are recent. The investigation is being carried out by specialist detectives at the Met's Specialist Crime Unit. And they are encouraging anyone who believes that they may be a victim of a sexual offence, no matter how long ago it was, to contact the police. There have been no arrests and inquiries continues. Now, I make this point on the basis that within the course of tonight's episode, I mentioned that there has been no police investigation so far. Now, what to make of the timing of this? Russell Brand is currently recording. It's now just after 5 o'clock UK time on Monday, the 25th of September. Russell Brand is taking to the camera again back on Rumble today for his first episode since the allegations were made. Now, you'll see in the episode that I'm very critical of the media coverage of those allegations and the cancellation that followed. And as I've mentioned throughout the broadcast you'll see tonight, any investigations I do take very seriously as the allegations themselves. But here's the facts that we know so far. The police have received reports. We knew of that prior to today, and an investigation has been opened. That's all. So my belief is that we should now continue to wait for the results of that investigation, allow the due process to unfold. In the meantime, we're grappling with all of the issues that I mentioned during today's broadcast. The documentary has been continued to be aired. The advertising has been pulled from Russell Brand. He's been demonetized and demonized and cancelled, and all of the wider issues that you'll hear about in tonight's episode. All of these things are important to address. And the cancel culture itself is a big part of the problem that we need to look at. So please do enjoy tonight's episode. I wanted to add this breaking news. It doesn't change the nature of the story other than the correction that there was at the point of recording, there was no police investigation underway. But again, to clarify, there are no arrests at present. Russell Brand is still broadcasting. So the big question we're asking at the head of this episode is, will Russell Brand stay free? Tune in to find out. Will Russell Brand stay free? Is he facing genuine accusations, or is this a coordinated agenda to bring down a prominent voice that is a threat to the establishment? Whilst it's of course possible that both are true, without due process, it's going to be very difficult for us to understand. In this episode, however, we'll focus on some of the wider ramifications and explore whether this is in any way coordinated, as well as exploring some of the wider issues. Now, if you weren't aware, Russell Brand has been accused of rape, sexual assault, and emotional abuse during a 7-year period between 2006 and 2013 at the height of his fame, whilst he was a presenter for BBC Radio 2 and Channel 4 and actors in various different Hollywood films. Others have come forward and made a range of accusations about Brand's controlling and predatory behavior and some character attacks as well. He's firmly denied the allegations and any criminal wrongdoing, and has stated that all his relationships have been consensual. Now, the findings that we're discussing here came from a joint investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4's Dispatches, which was broadcast over a week ago. Now, Russell Brand has subsequently been demonetized by YouTube due to these media allegations from anonymous sources, and other platforms now have been put under pressure by units within the UK government. More to follow on this throughout this story. Now, first and foremost, before we really get into the conversation tonight, I do want to just underscore the serious nature of the allegations, irrespective if they are proven to be true or not. The reality is anyone who makes these types of allegations should be treated seriously, any woman or man, in fact, and they are very real issues. And unfortunately, it's well documented that criminal proceedings rarely lead to justice. And this, in my view, requires a much bigger conversation. Nonetheless, in this case, is it a good enough reason not to go to the police in the context of these very specific circumstances, given that this matter has been thoroughly aired in the public as public laundry, if you will, and the impact it's had on Russell Brand? Although these allegations were made anonymously, and I recognize the very real difficulties in reporting these types of issues, given the emotional, physical, sensitive nature of these types of conversations. But given this is now fully in the public domain, surely if these are genuine accusations, then it would be highly questionable if those making the accusations did not go to the police. But as yet, there is no evidence of any police investigation, despite the police setting up a unit to investigate. and it's unknown whether any of these four accusations or anonymous accusers have come forward to the police. I tried writing to the Met for confirmation, but they refused to give me information. But I know other journalists have written, particularly in the context of the UK government's attempt to intervene in the media reporting, because there's been this accusation that what the media could publish on this could compromise any court proceedings. And that would be true if there had been any arrests, or if there'd been any of the accusers had been interviewed by detectives, or if there was any active proceedings that could be prejudiced by public information in the media. Yet the journalist has gone on to say that none of this appears to be true, and therefore the media can carry on publicizing as much as they like, because it's unclear whether there is any police proceedings whatsoever in lieu of the allegations, which makes the whole thing highly questionable. And of course, Russell Brand has flatly refused the allegations. Nonetheless, of course, as we've seen in the last week or so, that Russell has already been trialed and convicted in the court of public opinion, and as such, his career and his reputation has been left somewhat in tatters. And it became very clear early on that there are three Russell Brand camps in response to the news. One, those who don't like him, so they believe the accusers unwittingly. He's clearly upset a lot of the legacy left and the establishment, after all. The second group, those who do like him and therefore don't believe the accusers. And then there's the third group, which is, it's irrelevant if I like him or not. He's entitled to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence. So my question is, if we're not all in group three, then why not? Why are we allowing our biases, our views or perspectives on the individual to cloud our ability to recognize that due process is necessary? Instant belief is a problem, but so is instant disbelief. If the allegations are indeed legitimate, we cannot live in a system where the accused do not have the opportunity to defend themselves. Calm and reasoned questioning has been pushed aside by the resulting moral outrage with a deep polarizing impact, and as such, this polarization happens to get more attention to the media stories, and the more intensely the press can generate moral outrage, the more it can be stoked, the greater attention the media can garner. And it's clearly been a field day for the media since this story broke. Now, the reality is both sides of the story, what we're the kind of, as always, it's this or that, elevating ideology over truth. Those on either side of the argument forget how essential doubt is. That is, honest, curious, evidence-seeking doubt. In order for a fair and free society, we need such skepticism. Is Brand guilty? I don't know, but the court of opinion knows no better. And it's not the place for the accusations to be settled. We're not dealing with trial by social media. The instant belief, the uncritical treatment of the allegations as truth betrays the skepticism that is required for justice to be served. Otherwise, known previously as innocent until proven guilty. Now, of course, I have my own prejudices as well. I've appreciated Russell Brand's whimsical way of challenging the establishment, which is perhaps why he's been specifically a target for such allegations. After all, there are sadly millions of people who have been victims of sexual assault and rape that could have been the focus of such a documentary, and their plight for justice, featuring the inadequacies of the legal system. But no, it's not the everyday man that they are going after. It's a prominent celebrity with a particular history of promiscuity and a very specific set of views about the world that contravenes the approved narratives of the establishment. However, putting Russell's views on the establishment to the side for one moment, it's evident that the famous and the rich get much more publicity about these types of allegations, and this alone has influence on how we perceive the truth. Sadly, as a society, we tend to turn our heads away from the facts pertaining to sexual assaults. The truth is a taboo subject. Adults in consensual relationships and sadly young children within their own families are frequently abused, and yet we consistently look to sensationalize and publicize the high-profile cases, and yet in the very same system, the victims and survivors, especially children who are left in situations of ongoing abuse, have no voice whatsoever. Now, it's not that I believe anyone who wants to speak up should be believed without question, but why are the majority silenced? What about those who are affected about with accusations like this on a day-to-day basis? Why isn't there wider justice? Now, of course, we are witnessing this kind of approach during a time where Russell is causing a stir in the establishment. But nonetheless, Russell himself deserves due process. Now, of course, it doesn't excuse him if the accusations indeed prove true. However, if similarly proven innocent, this will cause lasting damage to Russell Brand's reputation, career destruction, social ostracization, demonetization is one thing we've already seen, being deplatformed. His book tour has been paused. His tour has been cancelled. His agents dropped him due to these anonymous allegations for something that happened years ago, and yet there's no evidence of any ongoing investigation other than the media witch hunt. Now, as I said, why do we alienate ourselves from the very real cases that are beyond the celebrity? Is it as a society that we favor the safety of having such matters as a safe distance from the comfort of our own lives? There's lots of things to unpack here, but the fundamental point I want to make around the allegations before we move on is I do not want to live in a society where a man or a woman can be branded a rapist by an accusation alone, without the guardrail of presumed innocence and the democratic requirement of proving someone's guilt beyond reasonable doubt before we mark him or her a criminal and banish him or her from the public eye. If we don't have these safeguards, these guardrails, then society will descend into chaos. Now, again, as I've already mentioned, this is not to overlook the flaws in the justice system and the difficulties of convicting a case that is 10, 20 years ago. That's why we have things like the statute of limitation, which I might talk more about later on, because it makes it very difficult for a fair trial to actually emerge. But in any case, in the context of what we're talking about here, lives and reputations can be destroyed at the mere point of a finger. Russell Brand or any other accused of such crimes should not have their life destroyed just because he or she has been accused of criminal behavior. Now, whilst it is rare, we've also seen there are too many examples where lives have been left in tatters because of trial by media in the court of public opinion, where the accused is then deemed guilty in the public sphere, but then proven innocent in the courts. Now, imagine getting fired because an anonymous source has made a news allegation against you and therefore having your entire reputation torn to shreds and your integrity questioned. Now, the irony is not lost that the very same Channel 4 just last year aired another documentary called The Accused, National Treasures on Trial, where Sir Cliff Richard, Paul Gambaccini and Neil Fox open up about the impact of being investigated for historic sex crimes that had upon their lives, their families, their careers and reputations having been found innocent. Let's not also forget that Russell Brand himself was once the darling of the media and the left and the establishment, with his prior reputation and character as the 4-time shagger of the year, who has probably had more sexual encounters than most prolific porn stars, a caricature that was cheered on and celebrated by the media, embraced by the wider culture during the noughties, no pun intended. He may have been pushing the boundaries during the boundaries of the norm during such a period, during the peak of his fame. But we've also got to recognize that his behavior was directly encouraged and incentivized by the very same media outlets that have now turned upon him. Now, also distancing themselves from the sense of moral superiority of a character that they helped to create. We also see, looking back, that many women flocked to be around him, and many men themselves wanted to be like him. It was encouraged at the time. Now, we may have all grown up a little bit and look back and say, well, that wasn't quite right. And of course, with Russell Brand's self-confessed sex addiction of the past, these reported violations are not beyond the realms of the imagination. But it feels what the media is saying is these are serious allegations. It's not a surprise, as code for give his accusers the benefits of a doubt, because the 2000s persona now looks unacceptable, meaning his 48-year-old self is being persecuted for the behaviors of a 20-year-old self without court proceedings. In other words, he's being treated as guilty until proven innocent. Now, I've already spoken more about the allegations themselves than I'd hoped to, but surely the questions that we're asking here about the means by which the entire story has been brought to light are necessary. There's a much bigger problem afoot that we may realize. The foundation of a free society isn't just a free press, it's an honest press. there are very few on the left or the right who believe that our media have any integrity whatsoever. So where do we find truth? How do we trust the media? Does it have an agenda? Which brings us to address the next big point, the elephant in the room, which is this one big coordinated agenda to take out a threat to the establishment? Because what's unfolded since the initial allegations has been quite truly shocking. Now, before we even get into that, let's realize that all major news outlets published the story when it first emerged within 21 seconds of one another. So it seems like they had some very clear background information. The timing was impeccable. And a press release was sent out saying that Channel 4 Dispatches was going to air a potentially career-ending documentary on Saturday night without naming Russell Brand at the time. And it said that the show had the potential to be hugely damaging for an A-list household name, and that it could halt the career of at least one celebrity with the contents, which sounds like it could have been the objective all along. Now, to quote the Times article, this is to quote, "They only felt safe to speak after being approached by reporters and felt compelled to do so given Brand's online prominence as a wellness influencer with millions of followers on YouTube." Sounds to me that they didn't like what he'd become, despite the accusations being about his 20-year-old self. Now, Channel 4 said that the Dispatches team had been investigating Russell Brand since 2019. That's now nearly 4 years, including speaking to hundreds of people working in comedy, show business, and the film industry. Doesn't sound like a witch hunt at all. That's a lot of people to speak to in order to find evidence to match the conclusions that may well have been predetermined, or at least predestined if the allegations indeed become true. Now, however, despite the outrage around this topic, we also need to be able to ask questions about the very nature of the media investigation itself. Is it unbiased? Is it balanced? Does it put forth multiple points of view? To what extent is the evidence being cross-examined and counterpoints being put forth? Is the evidence redacted or presented in full? What methods are being used in interviewing those involved? And were leading questions asked? How were people identified for the show? There are already screenshots of those who have been featured in the show, showing some of the messages and emails that they received in order to corroborate the intention of the producers. Now, this type of skepticism is indeed required. It's the essential component of the model of innocent until guilty. And I've seen enough legal documentaries to know the importance of cross-examination of the alleged victim and the defendant alongside a range of expert witnesses and testimony, none of which can happen if we continue to proceed by the trial by social media. But let's look at the wider question the questions that have emerged since the original allegations. Now, the question of, is this a coordinated attack? Well, let's look what's happened since. The British government, the UK communications arm of the British government, have written to all of the major platforms, essentially requesting that they demonetize Russell Brand. Now, YouTube had already taken the step of doing so, but was that under the instruction of the UK government? We saw it throughout the entire COVID chapter that the government were intervening in the press and in social media activity. So is this just another example of government overreach? Now, subsequently, Rumble have written a strong letter saying that they thoroughly disagree with the government's request and that they believe that anyone has the right to monetize their content whilst any allegation is unproven. Now, this all coincides with the online safety bill, which interestingly has taken a turn in the last 24 to 48 hours, with now the question of Rumble being forced out of the United Kingdom. Now, you may or may not know, people in France already cannot watch content on Rumble. France has already taken the decision that they will not allow Rumble to broadcast in France. So if you're in France, like one of my team, you can't watch Rumble. And it looks like we could be heading the same way in the United Kingdom around this specific issue, which is now being used as a catalyst to force content producers and platforms off our screens in the name of safetyism. Now, we have to recognize this is a concerted war on free speech. This is just at the tip of the iceberg around what else is happening around this. And the online safety bill is a very real threat. And people are saying, is this linked? Is it? Well, apparently so. It looks very much increasingly likely that this is, and it affects people like you and I. Anyone that can create content or post on social media could come into a range of issues due to the Ofcom's view, and Ofcom, of course, have taken a very strong stance towards the establishment views in the last few years. So very convenient that this independent organization is the one that's going to be calling the shots on the media and independent media, what they can and cannot say over the coming years. So this is a very real issue, and I have deviated somewhat from the main topic, but You can't disconnect the conversation. The fact that all of these outlets were written to by the government off the back of this, and the very consideration that someone could have their earning capacity taken away from them based on unproven allegations. And where is the proof going to come from if this never proceeds any further than a media allegation? And what's going to happen next? That's the big question. Will Russell Brand sue for defamation of character? We're in this murky mess at the minute, but nonetheless, I look at the stories every single day across the media, and nothing is coming forward to actually take this down the road of justice. It's all defamation of character. It's character assassination. And if you look at the media bias with the publications that are going in hardest on this, it's very clear that they represent the established order. So is this an attack on a voice as a prominent voice against the established order? Who knows? But the evidence so far appears to be so. And the usual mechanisms are coming out, dispelling it as conspiracy theory. And again, I want to be very clear, as I hopefully have been. I take the issue and the allegations very seriously, but I also take justice very seriously. I also acknowledge the failings within the justice system. I also know that it's very difficult to give a fair trial if neither party can provide reliable evidence 20 years on. It's well known by psychologists as well that our memory over time can be distorted. This cannot be ignored, particularly when the accusations arise as a result of media inquiries that may induce bias in itself. Now, I'm not saying that has happened, but it can't be ruled out, which is why reverting to the court of law is important. Now, who knows what direction this will take, whether Russell Brand will take any action, whether any police action will emerge. There's, of course, been lots of stories coming out about Russell Brand's behavior during this time, which, again, as I've touched upon, was celebrated by the media. His character is almost a caricature that was built by the media and celebrated and monetized. And now the tables have turned. So who knows where this is all going to go? But right now, my big takeaway outside of the allegations themselves is the absolute war on the fundamental rights that we have as citizens, the democratic process, the legal process, the foundations of a fair and free society are being eroded. Do we want to live in a world where one can be accused of something and have their entire reputation tarnished without due process? What do you think? Now, what about these letters from the government departments to these platforms? What about the prospect of Rumble being taken off our screens in the United Kingdom, forced outside of the UK, with the possibility that the directors may even be arrested upon entering in the United Kingdom if that happens? This is an unfolding story. Now, as I record this, Russell Brand is now taking to the camera once again on Rumble. He's now recording his show again. It's 5:15 on Monday evening when I'm recording this prior to my release of this episode. And it's been very interesting to see what he has to say about the situation, whether he comments on the situation. But clearly in his video that he released over the last few days, he is also continuing the line of inquiry that this may well be a coordinated attack. So let me know your thoughts. What's your reflections on the situation? What do you think's going on? What do you think what will happen over the long term? And what's the long-term prognosis for the foundations of a free society? Are they under threat? At the weekend, I was in London marching with thousands of other people in defense of the attacks on our foundational freedoms. This was a coordinated protest in 40 different locations around the world, which shows that, since the COVID chapter has subsided, the ongoing trajectory of the erosion of our freedoms has not been curtailed. So right now is not a time to sit back and watch as the world unfolds in this way. It's time to take a stand. And again, this is irrespective of the allegations that I'm sure many of you also take seriously. This is about the wider ramifications that must be addressed in and around the story itself. So thanks very much for tuning in. My name is Dan Astin-Gregory. This is the Pandemic Podcast. Please join our mailing list at danastingregory.com/pandemic, and I'll see you again for our very next episode of the Pandemic Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.